here we have transport demand management, and each sample of well-practiced and successful intervention includes park and ride. When we say park and ride, parking spaces are provided usually close to an expressway where drivers can board public transit, for example, buses or light rail, that provide service to the city center. This has become a staple feature in the outer zones of many North American and European cities. Its success is variable, however, and there is some evidence that park and ride may increase car use, as people who may have used regular buses services now use their cars to drive to the car parks. Next is traffic calming. When you say traffic calming, measures that seek to reduce the speed of vehicles in urban areas such as speed bumps and street narrowing. For residential streets, the goal is to make their use by drivers unattractive because of the obstacles. For thoroughfares, the objective is to reduce the average speeds. The measures indicate the need for much greater attention to street design and layout. Next is priority lanes for buses and high occupancy vehicles and truck routes. These lanes on major thoroughfares and expressways can be reserved for buses, taxis, and passenger vehicles with several occupants. This has become an essential feature of transport planning in North America, where major highway expansion projects offer priority lanes. The goal is to encourage the use of buses and high-occupancy vehicles that can be seen to travel at higher speeds along the reserved lanes by other drivers who may be stuck in traffic jams. The setting of truck routes allows for better segregation between passengers and freight traffic and more fluidity in traffic flows. Next is teleworking and alternative work schedules. Encouraging work hours other than the dominant 9 to 5 schedule. One of the most salient problems in transport planning is that demand is concentrated in two main peak periods. In the past, efforts were made to meet this demand by increasing road capacity, which resulted in the underusage of the off-peak capacity. Promoting flexible schedules and encouraging teleworking are policies that seek to spread out the demand for transport over more hours, even reduce the demand altogether. Next, promoting micromobility. In some countries, particularly the Netherlands, the bicycle is an important mode of travel. Walking, cycling, and other forms of micromobility, such as electric bikes and scooters, are energy efficient and encourage physical activity. However, in automobile-dependent cities, micromobility is difficult to integrate with trucks and cars. Encouraging greater use of micromobility requires significant planning adjustments, such as providing sidewalks, reserved lanes, charging stations, and bike stands. Next is car or ride sharing. Conventionally, such schemes encourage drivers to share car use with neighbors or co-workers when their mobility coincided. Information technologies have enabled the extension of car sharing schemes to a wider base of ride sharing through platforms that reconcile drivers, offering mobility and users. Next is enhancing pedestrian areas. In many areas of high population density, the quality of life, for example, enhanced safety, less pollution, etc., and the visual attractiveness of streetscapes can be enhanced by excluding vehicles from streets altogether or limiting access to public transport vehicles. In Europe, this has become a distinctive feature of the historic cores of many cities. Next is improving public transit. Public transit use has declined in most cities, yet it is the only alternative to the car in these cities, and thus enhancing the use of transit has become a major planning objective. Improvements include making transit more attractive by improving bus schedules and the appearance and comfort of transit vehicles and stations. At the same time, efforts are underway to widen the range of transit alternatives. These include extending commuter rail services and constructing new systems such as light and heavy rail modes. And lastly, parking management. Restricting on-street parking and charging higher rates for parking. This also applies to the parking of delivery vehicles, which has become an important issue with the growth of e-commerce and the associated home deliveries. Next is governance in transportation. When we say governance in transportation, it concerns the ownership and management of assets and resources to fulfill goals such as profit or welfare through the exercise of authority and institutional resources. It concerns the public as well as the private sectors, but tends to apply differently depending on if public or private interests are at stake. In both cases, a significant concern is performance, which is how effectively available assets are used. Governance in transportation have two main components. Number one is public ownership. When we say public ownership, it is common because of the economic and strategic importance of many terminals. In several jurisdictions, passenger railroads are owned by the national government, and the passenger stations are thus under the control of the state-owned rail company, as is the case in the China, Europe, and North America. Number two is private ownership. When we say private ownership, these are numerous exceptions for specific modes. For example, include road freight or distribution centers, rail freight transport or terminals, and rights of way, and where privatization has taken place in ports and airports. Here, private capital is used to provide infrastructure. Here are some effective governance for transportations and has several advantages. Number one is confidence, which means it provides confidence that an activity such as a terminal, a transit system, or a logistic zone is effectively managed. Number two is capital cost, which means lowers capital costs as investors and financial institutions have confidence that the allocated capital will be effectively used to develop and expand productive assets, generating returns. Number three is competitiveness. Improves the capability to compete through the retention of existing users and the attractions of new ones. Number four is stability. It confers long-term resilience in the organization, providing stability in capital markets and the financial institutions supporting them.